Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube, where we go behind the headlines to find out more about a story and why it matters. In this episode, we're discussing the ongoing situation in Sudan. The civil war there has claimed thousands of lives and displaced millions of people. An emergency session of the United Nations Human Rights Council has unanimously approved a formal investigation into allegations of a massacre last month in the Sudanese city of el-Fasher. Earlier, the UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, described the atrocities as a stain on the record of the international community.
None of us should be surprised by reports that since the RSF took control of el-Fasher, there have been mass killings of civilians, ethnically targeted executions, sexual violence, including gang rape, abductions for ransom, widespread arbitrary detentions, attacks on health facilities, medical staff and humanitarian workers, and other appalling atrocities.
I'm joined by our Global Affairs reporter in Nairobi, Richard Kagoe. Richard, the civil war has been ongoing since 2023. Tell us why.
It's been difficult for people who have been mediating between the two parties. So we're talking about the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces. These were two allies, but then they fell out because of a deadly power struggle between the two of them 2-3 years ago. And so intervention by regional bodies and also others led by the UN have tried to sort of like bring the two parties to the negotiating table. They've agreed on ceasefires, say humanitarian ceasefires, but those don't seem to be holding, and the fighting seems to be going on. There's total sort of like a disregard of these agreements. And I think that's really been the big question. Is there a will from both sides to ensure that they bring the fighting to an end, despite the devastating humanitarian cost that this has had? And that's the question, that no side seems to be willing to cede ground, and they continue with the fighting, despite the fact that a lot of people have died as a result of this, and the humanitarian burden this has had on Sudan itself and also the region.
Because the reports of the atrocities that we get, they are appalling.
They are. I've had the occasion of seeing images, videos, pictures from our fixers and field monitors working for various humanitarian organizations on the ground there. I'd give you an example perhaps of el-Fasher, even just before it fell to the paramilitary rapid support forces. So this was the only remaining army stronghold in the west of the country, in the vast Darfur region. There are children, emaciated because of malnutrition. Almost 1 in every 3 were dying because of a lack of food. They didn't have access to medicine. People have starved. We've had people who are sick because health centers have been closed. There's no access to them. Humanitarian corridors have been closed. So even delivery of life-saving assistance has really been a huge, huge, huge challenge. So we've had reports of women and girls who have been, sexually abused, others taken in as sex slaves, young men who have been forcefully conscripted to fight along, the RSF. We've also had those who are elderly, they have been taken in for ransom. So it's a very desperate situation that you don't just see in el-Fasher alone, but in various parts of Sudan. We've had, the RSF being accused of targeting civilian areas. Now, these are camps for those who are displaced. They've been targeting places of worship like mosques. We've seen now the conflict assuming a drone warfare. It's being fought in the skies. And there's just a sense of hopelessness and despondency amongst the general population who really don't know what they can do.
Yes, you mentioned el-Fasher, which was recently taken over by the paramilitary RSF. The UN Human Rights Council has ordered an investigation into the reported massacre there. What can that achieve?
There's been talk of, crimes against humanities and war crimes are being committed. And this was especially at the time when the city was falling to the RSF in mid-October. What we're hearing is that RSF troops conducted various human rights abuses. And I just mentioned some of them, like sexual violence, targeting women and girls. The reports also, people who were trying to flee being arrested at various checkpoints that had been mounted by RSF troops. There are reports of mass killings. The Sudanese Doctors Network tells us that there have been bodies that had been piling this past weekend. Families have not been able to access the loved ones who died, and they just simply wanted to give them a decent send-off. So these bodies are being compiled and disposed elsewhere. So sort of like the RSF was trying to conceal evidence of the atrocities that they did commit in el-Fasher. There are reports of mass killings that have happened, and this has been corroborated by research that's been done by Yale researchers, using satellite imagery, and you can see what appears to be bodies that are strewn all over across el-Fasher. So it shows that indeed that what has been committed there is really, really quite disturbing. In fact, the RSF leader at one point, I think it was just 2 days after the city fell to the RSF, he did acknowledge in an address saying that, abuses were committed, and therefore they had started off an investigation mechanism to bring those that were the perpetrators to accountability.
Is there any sign of the violence ending?
It doesn't seem so, because we still hear that fighting is still happening within the vicinity of el-Fasher. What has happened right now is that the RSF, having secured el-Fasher, which now gives them control of this vast region called Darfur, which is to the west of Sudan. They're using this now to see how they can launch further attacks to the east of el-Fasher, to the central part of the country, which is controlled by the army. So what we're hearing is that just a few kilometers north of el-Fasher, the army has been battling the RSF, who've been targeting an area called Bara. It's a city in North Kordofan state. And so that's where a lot of people, especially who have fled from el-Fasher, have been heading to. So the fighting does still continue, despite the international pressure that has been coming off from the UN and even from various countries led by the US under what is called the Quad Initiative, just asking them to lay down their arms and give peace a chance. Well, we've heard that the RSF had accepted to a proposal for a humanitarian truce, which now would allow for 3 months for humanitarian groups to be able to deliver life-saving assistance to the population, and then followed by permanent ceasefire and hopefully a transition to to civilian rule. But that doesn't seem to be happening because the RSF is accused of conducting aerial attacks in areas even as far as Khartoum. Even just, I think, a couple of days leading up to this discussion, we heard of attacks targeting the northern state. So it looks quite, it's not quite promising, because both parties have been accused of committing atrocities. Both parties have been accused of disregarding certain agreements that they had agreed to previously. So it's very uncertain.
Thanks, Richard. And you can hear more of that interview on the Global News podcast, along with other stories from around the world. If you liked this episode, please do subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you'd like us to cover any other stories, please leave a comment below.